Hey everybody, Ray here. Today I'm going to make a downdraft vacuum dust table. And I'm going to do it so when I'm sanding projects like this guitar and making a whole lot of dust, the downdraft table will pull that dust right out of the air and I don't have to deal with cleaning it up later. If that's something you think you might be interested in, stick around. I'll show you how I do it. And don't forget, if you like this video, hit that thumbs up for me and don't forget to subscribe. To make this project, I went out and got myself a piece of 2x4 pegboard. That'll be for the top. The piece in the bottom, and you'll see how this comes together when I work on it, is going to be some 1/8" plywood. I'm using 2 pieces here because it's what I have for scrap, and you know how I like to use up scrap. The dimensions of the box are kind of driven by what I've got here. 16 inches wide, and I'm going to make it 21 inches deep. And I have some scrap 1/2" plywood here, and it happens to be 4.5 inches wide. So guess what? The box is going to be 4.5 inches high. We're going to start out here by cutting our pegboard down to 16.5 inches because that's the dimensions we'll need on one side. And I'll tell you something that's really going to help me here is I added this wing to my little portable saw stand, and it's really going to help to support the extra length of that pegboard when I cut it. I'll put that video up above here in case you want to see how I did that. For some reason, I lost the audio here, but all I'm doing is cutting my board down to 21.5 inches on the lengthwise side. Now, if you recall, I wanted the inside dimensions of my box to be 16 by 21. What I've done is I cut the top 16.5 by 21.5. The reason for that is because I want 1/4 inch of this to slip down inside the edge of my plywood here. So if I have a 1/2" plywood and I cut 1/4 inch rabbet down in there and that seats down in there, then I lose 1/4 inch on each side here. So that makes the actual inside dimensions continue to be the 16 by the 21. So in order to do that, I continued to make my lengthwise pieces of my frame 21 inches. So this piece is 21 inches. The width, instead of being 16 inches, is 17 inches. So when I assemble the 21 and the 17 together, what that does is it gives me an extra 1/4 inch allowance all the way around the frame, allowing me to cut a rabbet on the inside of it at about 1/4 inch in to drop this pegboard into. Now we're just going to take our sides and we're going to pin nail them together and glue them. I have this little squaring frame that I made up one time, and it's really helpful for a situation like this, because you want to get these corners together kind of quickly. Just get your glue on there. And we know that if we line these up and get them held together nice and tight in that corner, then they're going to be nice and square when I pin nail them together. So it just makes it quicker to do something like this. So we'll do all 4 corners like that on this squaring jig. So by cutting our little ledge in here, our little rabbet ledge, I think you'd call it, it allows us to drop our pegboard right inside there, and it just drops in and fits very nicely. Now, one thing I want to point out is I cut those little rabbet joints in there just by making a couple of passes on my table saw. You don't have to do that. You could make your frame the same size as the dimensions of your pegboard. Just set your pegboard right on top of it, screw it down. You don't have to indent it like I did here, and it'll work just fine. Now the next thing we need is a way to vacuum the dust out of this unit. So I was able to find, this is actually just an old piece of a vacuum tube that was laying around, and I cut a hole in the side here, and this vacuum tube fits in there really nicely. And when I get it in there, what I'll do is I'll actually put some silicone around there or something to make sure that it is really well sealed. Now what we're going to want to do is to put a bottom on this. And what we're going to do is slant the bottom so it starts out here underneath the vacuum hole, and then as it gets further away, it's going to come closer to the top. So the first thing I'm going to do is glue this piece right on here, and that's where the base of the bottom will sit. So we put a small brace here for our bottom piece to sit on one side, and then we put another brace up here for our bottom piece to sit on this side, such that our bottom piece will slant from the top down to the bottom. I had to use 2 pieces of scrap to do this. One piece will sit there, another piece will sit right in here. So it's 2 separate pieces, so I will probably just tape those together on the bottom just to make sure they stay together. Now what we'll do is we will come back and we will just fill all these gaps in with some silicone caulk. We want this thing to be as sealed as possible. So we'll just run some caulking around here to make sure that this is really sealed well. It shouldn't take a lot. And there we go. All right, so we've run our caulking all the way around our base here to make sure that's sealed in. We put in our dust port here, and I caulked around that on both sides to make sure that that's sealed in. And then what I've done is I've just run a bead of caulk around the bed where the pegboard is going to sit. I probably could have done that with brad nails or something else, but I decided I was just going to make it as tight as possible around those joints. So I just went ahead and used a thin bead of caulk. Not a lot, just a thin bead, because all I really want to do is to hold that thing in there a little bit, and I don't want it to maybe get sealed so tight that I couldn't get it back out if I wanted to. That ought to do it. I'm going to put some weight on that and let that sit and dry. So here's the completed box. And the downdraft works pretty well. I'm sanding a mahogany piece of guitar here, and this makes some really, really fine dust. I'm using a 220 grit paper, and I'll show you how fine this dust is. I'll see if I can show you on my hands what this dust looks like. But it's just a very fine dust. You see that? It really is a dust. And when I have the table on, it just sucks all that dust right down in there. I'm going to turn it on. It's going to be a little bit too loud, and I apologize for that. But there really is no issue once I've got this on. When I'm sanding, all of that excess dust falls right off onto the vacuum table here. And just to give you an example of how the downdraft works, you can see how it's pulling this piece of paper. And even if I just try to drop it off the end here, it's going to grab it and not let it fall. So it actually works pretty darn well. And just so you know, I just use a small, rigid ShopVac, and the peak horsepower is 5 horsepower. This is the 4-gallon unit, and it works just fine. It's not the most powerful vacuum in the world, but you know, it works great for the little projects that I do. Well, we're going to call this project complete, and I think this little box is going to do just what I intended it to do. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, don't forget, hit that like button for me, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.